Hello and welcome to the President's Podcast, right here on the record with the Ohio Senate. The views the news excludes. I'm your host, John Fortney, the Director of Communication for the Senate Republicans, the Majority Caucus in the Ohio Senate. Joining us as always, Ohio Senate President Matt Huffman, Republican from Lima. Welcome.
Great to be here again, John. Thanks.
Busy month. Early voting already underway.
Right.
Election Day is March, as I have to look just to make sure. Election Day is March 19th, but early in-person voting got started this week on Wednesday.
Right.
How do you vote normally?
Well, when we created absentee voting, I was sort of one of those folks that you only vote on Election Day. There's only one day to vote. And then I discovered, like a lot of folks, that, I want to make sure that I vote. That's just something I need to check off my list. So almost always I vote during the 30-day period. I had almost always voted on Election Day. I did vote absentee once when I had a trial up in federal court, and I couldn't be there on Election Day many years ago. So I always vote, my wife and I, Cheryl, before Election Day. It's just, it's kind of a let's get this thing done. We know we want to do it.
And how does that work? You just go into your county board of elections?
Right. So in Allen County, anyone can go. It's right downtown in what we call the Court of Appeals building, right on North Main Street. And usually not a line, especially if you're doing it 2 or 3 weeks beforehand. And that's why I'd encourage people to vote before Election Day. So because there may be a line, and there also may be other disruptions. It may be that it's a bad weather day. There's traffic problems. There's all sorts of things. So you're a little bit at risk, at least of waiting in a long line if you wait until the last minute. Just like anything else, if you wait till the last minute to get it done, things go wrong, and sometimes you don't vote.
So when you walk in, you show your ID.
Right.
So we have voter ID law in Ohio, so it's pretty simple.
Yeah, so if you would have had to register to vote. The time to register to vote for this March 19th election has already passed. But if you're registered to vote, you go down, you show your identification, a driver's license, state ID, and they have you registered. They give you the ballot. You go out, you fill out your ballot and turn it in. And usually, at least in Allen County, you're in and out of there in about 10 minutes.
Now, if you forget your ID, you can still vote provisionally, and then they check your ballot versus the registration.
What I would say to people is, don't do that. In fact, I think I know just about everybody who works in the Board of Elections, and I happen to not have my driver's license for some reason when I went in there. This is a couple years ago, and they said, we're not going to let you vote. I go, come on. No. I guess maybe there's a lot of people around who look like me. They're all my brothers running around town. So, but I think the important thing is, if you're going to go vote, make sure you have your ID with you.
How do you feel about mail-in voting? Because you may vote by mail here in Ohio. Of course, we had to vote by mail during the pandemic. I remember that very well. That was the first time I had ever voted by mail. But what are your thoughts on vote by mail? Some states, that's how they carry out their elections.
Right. Well, remember the time during the pandemic that we did that was a primary election. Primary elections are elections that we hold so that political parties can choose their nominees for the general election. Obviously, independent candidates don't have to go through the primary process. Now, we typically will add other issues on, sometimes school levies, liquor options, other things go on that. So, frankly, the primary election, we allowed that simply because we had to during that particular time. There's a number of problems with mail-in balloting. I think we should continue to have it. And those who are unable to vote in person, obviously because of health reasons, should obviously use that because they have to. But there's a number of provisions. One thing, for example, is we want the ballot to be received in a particular period of time so that a person can vote on or before Election Day. So there's a restriction about when you can request it and when the ballot has to be received or must be received in order for it to count. So you've got these days on either side. That's a hazard for you, okay? The other hazard is you ask for it by mail, and it doesn't come very quickly to your house.
The application.
Yeah, you have to apply, and all of these things that have to happen to make sure that, because when the ballot is out of the control of the people who are counting the ballot, you have to have these restrictions in place to make sure it's that person. So there's a whole number of deadlines and requirements with mail-in balloting that make it hazardous for your vote to count by mail. And one of those things is a couple of other things, which maybe we put them in the category of user error, is you're required to sign your ballot, and your cursive handwritten signature is supposed to match what's on the Board of Elections. And they're supposed to check that. Sometimes that's hard to do. And what you may quickly do on a ballot and send in may not look like what you did perhaps 20 years ago when you registered to vote. Our signatures actually change over time. So that's a bit of a hazard, and maybe not so much, but the bigger issue, and I'll just tell you an anecdote about this, is you may fill out the ballot incorrectly, okay? And if you vote, and I'll just tell you what happened. So I'm in voting absentee. This is a couple of years ago, and there's a person in front of me, and they're filling out their, and they're going over to put their ballot into the machine that's counting the ballots. And I'm standing there waiting, and they're getting a little frustrated because the machine won't take their ballot. Well, the reason it won't take it is they voted for two people in the same race. And so they call the election worker over. The election worker comes over and says, well, here's the problem. You voted for two candidates in the same race. The machine won't take that. You can only vote for one. And a person says, oh, well, what do I do now? Well, we'll give you another ballot. You can go back in, you can fill it out, and come back and do that. Well, there's nobody in your house to help you with that. If you either because you're not sure whether you can vote for two or not, because in some places you do vote for two candidates on a school board, or there's two county commissioners on the ballot at the same time. Either you're simply not sure, or you just make a mistake. When that ballot goes to the Board of Elections, it doesn't count. There's nobody in your home for you to ask, at least not a Board of Elections member, for you to do that. So there's a lot of hazards in mail-in balloting.
Or you forget to sign.
You forget to sign it, a whole number of other things, or there is some other problem that's not apparent to you with whether you're allowed to vote in this election. Are you registered in time? Are you really a resident of the state of Ohio? You thought you were, but you just moved here, or you moved back, or whatever. You can get assistance at the Board of Elections with all of those questions. There's not somebody in your house necessarily who can answer all those. So I'd encourage people to vote in person to make sure that their vote counts.
The constitutional amendment that you and I have talked about, it's a campaign to pass a constitutional amendment. Right. You and I have talked about this effort to try to do many things that would repeal voter ID, but one of the other things that it would do is allow counties to decide how many drop boxes that they would want, where you would drop your ballot off in. Is that a security risk to begin with? That's not anything that you would support.
Well, no, I don't. And the reason is that the more places where there can be fraud that takes place, and the more hands that these things go through, the more likely that there's going to be out-and-out fraud, but also simply mistakes. And someone drives by the box every day, and they've got the thing sitting on their front seat of their car, and they go, I'll do it tomorrow. Well, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it tomorrow. And they don't drop it off in time for it to get counted. Again, the more pieces and parts we put to voting, the more likely your vote isn't going to count.
Or who's dropping your ballot?
Well, yeah, I mean, box. Yeah, we have that problem too. We have when my children were in college, we would get their ballots at our house. Well, we could easily have filled them out, signed them, and dropped them, and that would have been the end of it. Of course, we never did that. But lots of other places, people will call and say, hey, what do you want me to do with your ballot? Oh, just fill it out however you want it. You can sign my name to it. You got my power of attorney. Well, you're not allowed to do that, but a lot of people do. The more these proliferate, in the less that we have actual oversight of elections, the more problems that we're going to have.
That's the real disenfranchisement element that could happen, of voter security.
Right.
Speaking of disenfranchisement, you always hear things from the left and campaigns about Ohio disenfranchises voters and this effort to disenfranchise voters. It's kind of hard to do that when you have a month of early voting in Ohio. I mean, the voter does have some responsibility to follow the law, initiate wanting to go vote, make sure they have their ID, and you have a month to do so.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I remember when we debated the first extension or creation of this, and then some extensions. You know, it was 14 days and now it's 30. And the argument on the other side was people are desperate to vote, but we won't let them. And, you know, if early voting, I think, started yesterday, and you want to vote in this March 19th election, you may be sitting at your house saying, I'm desperate to vote, but I'm not going to vote today because I don't really have time. And if you say that every day till March 19th, and you never request a mail-in ballot, and it comes to March 20th, you say, I didn't get to vote, the system's unfair. I'm not sure how much fairer we can make it. There's a whole month to do this if you want to. And of course, you know it's March 19th, or anybody, and it may simply be, I'm not that interested in voting. My neighbor keeps asking me about it. I keep telling them, and then afterwards I'm going to say, well, the system's unfair. So.
You also have to be registered to vote, as we alluded to. This effort to put the initiative on the ballot, the constitutional amendment on the ballot, would automatically register voters at the BMV. As soon as you move it into Ohio, you would have to opt out. How do you feel about automatic voter registration? I mean, people wouldn't even necessarily know that they're now registered to vote in Ohio, and maybe they don't want to.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, I've said that to people, and I say, you know, there are people who don't want to be registered to vote. Well, that can't be true. Well, in fact, it is. There's a small class of people who religiously don't vote. One of the employees at my office in Lima is a Jehovah's Witness. They don't vote, okay? So there's a small class of people like that. There's another group of people who don't want their name on public records, or as little as possible. And so they don't want to be called by a pollster. They don't want someone knocking on their door. They don't want mail coming to their house. That's going to happen if you're registered to vote.
Or you might wind up on a jury.
You wind up on a jury. They don't want to go to people don't want to serve on juries. I've received a lot of phone calls through the years of people saying, how do I get out of jury duty? And I tell them, you don't. You show up and do your civic duty. And they usually don't like that answer, by the way. But so there's a whole lot of people who don't want to do it. Now you can say, well, you can opt out. Well, is that really the answer? Because if someone says, I just need my driver's license, and the person says, well, you know, you're going to be registered to vote, you can opt out. They go, oh, I'll worry about that later. Well, then they're on this. The other argument simply is, if you're going to be an active, educated participant in the system, you should want to do that, not you're automatically in the system because we say so. So I don't think it's a very good idea. And frankly, I don't think you're going to get that many more people as part of the voting public anyway.
And maybe you don't know exactly, maybe that person is not who they say they are either. There's a potential voter security issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, the more places that you can register, the more pieces and parts to an election system, the more difficult it is to make sure everybody says who they are.
By the way, if you're interested in some of the election bills that have been considered by the General Assembly, Senator Teresa Gavarone, who's a member of leadership, recently was on one of her podcasts. She and Senator Rob McCauley sponsored Senate Bill 215 that would prohibit foreign campaign dollars from becoming or funding issue campaigns in Ohio that would target the Ohio Constitution. They offered their first sponsor testimony on Wednesday of this past week, something you support, because we already prohibit foreign campaign dollars, and when I say foreign, I mean campaign contributions coming from outside of this country. We already outlaw that for candidate campaigns.
Yeah, so this has to do with issue campaigns. There are lots of folks who are not United States citizens who want to affect what the policy is in the state of Ohio. We've seen that in a lot of different situations. But there's in this case a citizen of Switzerland, who I thought was supposed to be neutral on everything, by the way.
Right,
Yeah. And he's spending millions of dollars on state legislative campaigns and other issue campaigns around the United States. Yeah. Now, we've got plenty of people in the United States who have plenty of money, but at least they're citizens and subject to the laws of the state of Ohio, or whatever state they may be in. So I think this is a pretty common sense thing that most people would agree to, and things that, frankly, a lot of the media and folks on the left and right have been asking for.
Senate Bill 137 is also sponsored by Senator Gavarone and a member from the other side of the aisle, Senator Bill DeMora. 137 deals with ranked choice voting, and maybe you've heard about that, where you don't just vote for the person that you think should represent that office. You rank the people on the ballot. Well, that'd be my first choice. That's my second and third. But it almost has a detrimental, it really does have a detrimental effect in some of these states that have this, because it lengthens the amount of time of the election and also is not always tabulated correctly. What are your thoughts on ranked choice voting? Because there are some states that try to use this.
Yeah, well, let's, if we assumed in a perfect world that the multiple problems that you have with ranked choice voting could be solved, the things that you just pointed out. This is trying to solve a problem that people perceive that, well, it's, the guy who won by 2%, and, this guy won, but then there's these other people, and everybody would have said, well, he didn't win, but I would have voted for third place, fourth place, and all of that. And it begins to look like the system that they have in Great Britain, Israel, a lot of the other systems that are coalition governments that get formed. Now, in Israel, for example, I think they've had 4 or 5 different governments in many years. And that makes it, frankly, difficult to govern. You may not like who got elected mayor of Columbus because they do lots of stuff you don't, but that person that's the decisions people make, and you have to live with them or move out of the city of Columbus. If you don't like who's running Ohio, you can do that. And I certainly don't recommend that. What I recommend is get involved in a political system and change who your state representative or state senator is, or who the mayor is, or whoever it may be. And I think what it ends up being is an inability to come to a conclusion on how to govern. And I think it's kind of a bipartisan agreement, because this certainly could affect Democrats who are elected to office, especially in the big cities, as well as Republicans in other areas of the state. I think that's why there's bipartisan support.
This is also the very first election where we will be having candidate races for the General Assembly under the new maps that were drawn by the Redistricting Commission and passed in a bipartisan unanimous vote. What's your message about that?
Well, I think the issue of redistricting has been a fight ever since there were districts. Go back to the British House of Commons in the 1500s. There's these stories. It essentially is one of the things, slavery was the most important issue, but it's one of the things that divided Western Virginia over Virginia, because the folks in Richmond drew small population districts for themselves and big population districts for the folks in Western. And so the folks who are in Western Virginia, which was also almost called Kanawha, by the way, the Indian name. But that's why that state became part of the reason. There was a lot of resentment in what is now West Virginia. So this has always been an issue. I participated in the process as it was in 2011 when I was in the House, and we worked with Republican and Democratic parties and members to pass the 2 bipartisan issues in 2015 and 18. That process in this past year created new maps for 2024. I'm still waiting for somebody to tell me, is there any place else in the United States, in federal or state government, throw in local government, on a contentious political issue where both parties got together and did something on a bipartisan, unanimous basis. That to me means what all parties got together in 2015 and created, when allowed to work, in fact did work. A series of penalties and incentives for both sides. So we're going to have different districts. Some of the districts didn't change at all, some of them slightly. Probably in some of the cities, in bigger population counties, there's more significant changes. So people may recognize or see some different names there.
But these are compact districts, would you?
Yeah, I think that part of a traditional redistricting goal are compact districts. It makes it easier to govern, for people to know who their member is. And so that was part of the things we did, keeping communities together, which people asked that happen. Where possible, having more competitive districts. Not really possible in Western Ohio, and not really possible in downtown Cleveland, but many of those districts are competitive. So yeah, we'll have new races in 2024, a lot of new candidates.
Poll workers. I always see the Secretary of State trying to get people interested in becoming a poll worker. And I think there has been somewhat of a shortage of poll workers here in the last several elections. Some, of course, the pandemic definitely complicates things. A lot of senior citizens, retired people go to the serve as poll workers. Why would you encourage people to be a poll worker, or even younger people to consider being a poll worker, or would you?
Yeah, absolutely. I would encourage anybody who feels like they have the time. There's actually some incentives in some cases. I think lawyers get CLE if they go do that, and there's some other different things like that. But obviously, it's an important part of our Republican form of government, and it's for one thing, it's not a full-time job all year long. This is something that happens on a periodic basis. You get paid, so that's good. And I think it really is something that needs to happen. They are having problem getting folks to do this. I think it's part of a general disengagement in a lot of things public. You can read the book about why there are fewer bowling leagues than there used to be, and other things like that. And my mom was a poll worker for years and years, but at the age of 94, I think she's done her part. So I'd encourage people to go do it. You have good training, and go with your local board of elections, and you'll find out what to do. You'll probably see a lot of friends of yours who are coming in to vote in your neighborhood, and it can be a very fulfilling deal.
Final thought on election security in Ohio. Even when I was in the media, and the lieutenant governor at the time was Secretary of State, John Husted, he came up with the phrase, and I think it's an important phrase, that Ohio, easy to vote, hard to cheat. Yeah. Do you still feel that way? Because we hear so much on the national level about this election was stolen and that election was stolen, and Democrats make this charge and vice versa. How confident are you in Ohio's election security?
Well, I'm very confident. I mean, I think I know a lot about Ohio's system, either through this job or participating, voting, just being a voter. And there's a number of things that sort of go into people having a lack of confidence in whether our elections are secure. Some of it is propagated by both sides, stories told and then retold on the media, get people excited and interested. And I've heard, a number of people, give this response, like, how can we make sure our elections are going to be secure? Well, one thing is people are more attuned to that question. The election workers are, the Secretary of State's office, the boards of elections and all of that. They think about it a lot more. And where, hey, you need to do this and deliver the box on time, and people will go like, well, we actually stopped for coffee and went in and drank a cup of coffee. Nobody's going to do that this time because they don't want. And so I think people are really geared up now to make sure that everything is done the way they want. So I'll just tell this story from history. Read a biography of Woodrow Wilson. So Wilson, of course, he was the former governor of New Jersey, president of Princeton University. He gets elected in 1912 essentially because Teddy Roosevelt split the Republican Party and the incumbent President William Howard Taft, and he split that vote, and Wilson gets elected. And with the exception of Grover Cleveland, in a couple of terms, the first Democrat elected since Abraham Lincoln in 1860, some 50-some years before that. Well, he, of course, runs for re-election in 1916 and was probably going to, a lot of people thought he was going to lose. And he, in fact, went to bed on election night believing that he had lost because, and the thing that changed overnight was the state of California, which for a long time was a very Republican state. Remember, Ronald Reagan was the governor there. Well, apparently in Shasta County, there was a wagon bringing the votes in, and it was snowbound in the mountains, trying to bring the votes in to be counted at the particular place. And it took a few days to get there to get counted, but eventually it did. And that was, I think it was like 6,000 votes, changed how California went in the election. And in fact, Wilson, who was getting ready to write speeches saying, you know, congratulating the winner, and he went, oh, I won. Now, today, that would have been a conspiracy theory. Someone would have said, what happened to change those ballots in the mountains in Shasta County, California? But in fact, we've always had problems like this, and we always will. We have fewer problems today than we did in the past. You know, there were times when people came in, here's your ballot, go put it in, and it can happen more on a smaller scale than a large scale. But we have the safest election system that we have ever had. Doesn't mean, by the way, that it's all going to, and it will be manipulated by outside sources, disinformation, all sorts of things. That's why it's important to be an educated voter. Vote based on what you know, not what you heard on TV the night before.
Ohio Senate President Matt Huffman.
Great.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks very much, John.
Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.